In this lesson, we're going to continue talking about the concept of misrepresentation in relation to the law of contracts. And we're going to focus on this idea of misrepresentation and intent, the idea of intentionally misrepresenting a certain factual matter of the case, which then obviously induces an individual to contract, which then presents an ability for voidability of a contract. So this is a continuation of our studies and an examination of the concept of misrepresentation. We noted that misrepresentation is what is known as one of the, quote, vitiating factors, which can be said to void a contractual arrangement, or even render it voidable on the part of the parties that are aggrieved. We noted that voiding a contract is void if it never existed in the first place. It had no legal implications, had no legal concept attached to it. Voidability relates to the idea of it having the potential to be void, but is only if it is on the part of the aggrieved parties to allow it to be void. The previous lesson, we looked at the concept of opinion as not necessarily meeting the threshold of constituting an actionable misrepresentation. Now, if you remember, we looked at the case where there was the sale of a piece of land which allegedly could farm 2,000 sheep. Now, given the fact that this was a piece of land that had not ever farmed sheep, it was considered that that statement was not a factual representation, and therefore a misrepresentation, given the fact that it was false. Rather, it was an opinion. It was a reasoned opinion on the basis of the size of the land and having no knowledge of how much land is required to farm sheep. In this lesson, we're going to talk about the future intent of the parties, highlighting some case law on the matter. So what do we mean here about future intent? Well, the general rule when it comes to future intentionality made by statements is that it cannot amount to actionable misrepresentation. And it's easy to see why this is the case when we think about what is required of misrepresentation. One of the key requirements of misrepresentation is the view that it must be a statement of material fact. And we noted previously, as I said, that opinion does not constitute a statement of material fact. A statement about the future intentionality of the parties, however, also cannot be a statement of material fact, owing to the nature of the statement as being a mere speculation, and therefore cannot represent any kind of statement of material fact. So if a statement about the future intent by the parties is given, and this is false, then this cannot represent actionable misrepresentation. However, the exception to the general rule is that while mere speculation about the future could not represent a material fact for the purposes of actionable misrepresentation, if the party deliberately misrepresents their epistemic foundations, and if on this basis they will falsely represent their future intention, then this can represent an exception to the general rule and therefore be actionable misrepresentation. What do I mean by epistemic foundations? Well, for those of you who are law students and not philosophy students, epistemology is the philosophy of knowledge. So your epistemic foundations is the knowledge that you have. And the foundational knowledge that you have about a particular thing. So what this is essentially telling us is if I misrepresent the knowledge that I have about a particular situation and I do not communicate that knowledge to the other party, then this could represent falsity, be falsely misrepresentation, and so as a result of which could actually render a statement or a contract void or voidable. Let's think about how this actually is operational in practice. And we can use the case of Edgington versus Fitzmaurice from 1885. Essentially, what this case illustrates is the view that future intent, this idea of future intentionality, can, in some circumstances, represent actionable misrepresentation. Now, what we think about here is that this is actually an exception to the rule. Remember this. This is the exception to the rule because future intent, generally speaking, does not represent actionable misrepresentation. But if it can have the ability to be a statement of fact, then it could be actionable misrepresentation if it is false, of course. The case itself involved a number of company directors who had collectively released statements on the basis of the prospectus of the issuance of a bond. In reality, however, these prospectuses were fraudulent and that they were based on false information, and that they were based on false information for the purposes of getting the purchase. So they did this false thing, intentionally did this false thing for the purposes of getting a purchase, for the purposes of inducing contracting, okay? They had informed the purchaser that the bond revenue would be used for the building of a business expansion, when in reality they were going to use the revenue to settle company debts that they had, okay? So they falsely misrepresented what the use of this bond revenue would be for. They said, build business expansion. We're going to use this revenue for business expansion. When in reality, they were going to settle debts for as a result. The claimant made the claimant in this case made it clear that he would not have purchased the bonds if he had been informed of the true nature and purpose of the revenue from the purchase of that bond. And as such, he made the claim that the statements made to him were actionable misrepresentation. So, this is a statement of future intent as to what they're going to do with the revenue, okay? It is a false statement of future intent. However, according to the application of the ordinary rule, a statement of future intent does not represent actionable misrepresentation. So on the general rule, it would essentially represent speculation rather than material fact, because you cannot know as a material fact what that money is going to be used for in the future. However, the court held that it was more than just a statement of future intention, because it was an untrue statement of future intention. And so as a result of this, the person who purchased the bonds, the claimant, were induced into the contract on the basis of false pretenses, for a false statement of future intention, and that this could therefore fall into the category of actionable misrepresentation, and so as a result of which would represent an exception to the rule in relation to future intentionality.